Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to ENG503. This is your Prose 2 module, and in this module we have been doing a travelogue, and now we're on to the short stories. And in the last two lectures we went into one of Poe's short stories, and I pointed out a few aspects of Poe's style, amongst which I told you that with Poe, the short story takes on a whole new form, a whole new character, and his short stories are such that they grip your attention, and they do not allow your attention to wander from the time he launches into that short story. When we were doing the introduction to the short story, I pointed out that the short story is different from the novel because there is no, for example, linear progression. You do not go from birth to death. You might start with death and then go backwards to birth. In the same way, you might start a story right in the middle of the action, and then the writer takes you backwards and forwards as he thinks fit. So one of the outstanding characteristics of Poe's stories is that there is suspense. Some of his short stories can be classified as mystery stories, but in the main they create suspense. There's a lot of action in the sense of happenings. There's a lot of happenings, and then your attention is gripped in such a way that you cannot concentrate on anything else, even if you try to. The story that we'll be doing today is The Black Cat, and some of you might think that it's a very, what you'd say, innocent and a simple title. But as we read the story, you'll be able to see how Edgar Allan Poe takes the concept of a black cat and transforms it in such a way that, for example, I can never look at a black cat and not think of this story. So he invokes suspense. He makes his story mysterious, he makes the characters mysterious, and everything is done in order to grip the attention of the reader from point A and make sure that that attention is focused, is concentrated throughout the story. And the end is where Poe generally winds up all the different threads, and that's when you see the entire pattern that emerges. And Poe is one of the foremost names in short story writing. You know by now that he was an American, he wasn't an Englishman. And the fact that after Walter Scott had sort of established short story as a form of literature, there wasn't much work done in England, and that it is in America that most of the work on the short story was done, in addition to what was being done in Europe. Where you had the French short story writers and the Russian short story writers giving us some beautiful works. So to start with The Black Cat, let's see what Edgar Allan Poe has for us in this story. For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. So the narrator starts off by saying, whatever I'm going to write now, I don't expect you to believe that, and yet it is the truth. Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject my very own evidence. So my own senses reject the evidence that I have. I myself cannot believe that these things have happened, so how can I expect my readers to believe it? Tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. So he starts off with a sentence which really grips your attention. He says, tomorrow I'm going to die, and today I have to write this story, otherwise it will never be written. My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. So something that is happening within the household, something that otherwise may not be of interest to readers. But let's see what he has in the following slides. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. So he says, they have presented nothing but horror, and to me, if they are not believable, I cannot expect my readers to believe what I'm going to write, but I have to write it, and so I am doing so. Hereafter, perhaps some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace, some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive in the circumstances I detail with awe nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. So he says, maybe a person reading them will be able to convert what I am writing into something plausible, something believable. Maybe when I write all this down, someone will read it and say, oh, this is nothing very special. So he plunges into his story, and he says, from my infancy I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. So from the very first, Poe establishes the outstanding characteristics of the narrator's nature. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. So he says, when I was small, I loved animals, I loved birds. So my parents, seeing how docile I was and that I did not intend harm to these animals and birds, provided many different pets for me, and I was never so happy as when I was feeding them or caressing them, taking care of them. So a very docile, very mild temperament had the narrator in his infancy. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in his manhood also he becomes a very docile person, a very mild-mannered person, and therefore he says that to those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. So from a description of himself as a baby, as a small child, the narrator moves on to something that is that is wider, that is broader. And he says that those who are of docile natures, of mild temperaments, are very fond generally of dogs, cats, birds, and so because he had been given a lot of pets as a child, and he took care of these pets himself, he developed a bond with them, a kind of affinity for these dumb creatures, and he calls them dumb because they do not have the power of speech. And he says anyone who has had a pet will know the unconditional love and support that animals and birds will give you when man lets you down. So he makes a comparison of men and animals and birds, and he says that men are selfish, men will let you down, but your pets will not. They will always be with you. Once they form a bond, they will not allow you to break it. I married early and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. So when he gets married, his wife also is very mild-mannered. She is very soft in nature. And when she observes his partiality for domestic pets, she brings different animals and even goldfish. She brings birds. So they have a house full of different kinds of pets. And both husband and wife, they take care of them, and they feed them and they caress them. So all in all, it's a very sort of happy household with the husband and wife and all these different pets that they're taking care of. And especially there was one creature with whom he forms a particular affinity, and that is a cat. And he gives a brief description of the cat, and he says that she was black and wise. She was intelligent. You wouldn't believe how intelligent she was. I'm sorry, you wouldn't believe how intelligent he was. Now, this was a male cat, a tomcat, and he would follow the narrator around the house all the time, in spite of the fact that his wife would sometimes make reference to cats being witches in disguise, black cats particularly. Now this was a myth, a superstition, that witches would turn into cats. And you know, his wife would sometimes as a joke remind him that, you know, you're very fond of the black cat and he's very fond of you, but you know that black cats are supposed to be witches in disguise. And she didn't speak of this seriously. This was just as a joke. Now they had named the cat Pluto, and the narrator says that Pluto was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. So he would follow the narrator around the house, and the narrator is surprised because he says, you know, if Pluto had his way, he would follow me out into the streets also. And then he goes on and he says, our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of fiend and temperance, had experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. Now, if you remember from what I told you in the previous lectures, there are points at which Poe starts to use language that is not really very easy to understand. And what he's trying to do is not approach the point directly, but he goes round and round and makes slightly convoluted sentences. What he's trying to say is that this relationship or this friendship of his with the cat, it grew, and for several years the cat and the narrator were inseparable as far as the house was concerned. But then the narrator started drinking. And with this problem of alcoholism, he became very moody, he became irritable, and not at all the kind of docile and mild-mannered person that he had described himself as. So as this problem of the consumption of alcohol and wine grew, the narrator became very moody, very irritable, and as he says, regardless of the feelings of others. And he says, I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. Now remember, in the beginning he had told us that his wife was also very docile, very mild-mannered, very soft-hearted. Now he starts abusing her. He starts using very harsh language even with his wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. You cannot expect this of a person who has been described as being very mild-mannered. But alcoholic drinks have this influence on you. They make you lose control of your reason. They make you lose control over your actions and your emotions. So anger became the predominant feature of his nature instead of mildness and docility of nature. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. Now, when you are moody, when you are irritable, then everything and everyone around you feels the change. His wife felt the change. He started abusing her. He even started to beat her. He talks about personal violence. And of course, in a house full of pets, something was bound to break. And he says that the other pets I neglected, but Pluto the cat was one pet for which I still retained a lot of love and affection. And he did not maltreat Pluto as he maltreated the rabbits, the monkey, even the dog. Because, you know, these pets were used to his presence and they would follow him around the house. And when he started to maltreat them, the pets couldn't understand what was happening. They still followed him around, but he started hitting out at them. He started using foul language until the time that even Pluto started to feel the bad temper that he was in. One night, returning home much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. Now, when these brute creatures feel any change in the person to whom they have attached themselves, they are very sensitive to emotions. And if they sense any change in the behavior, in the feelings of that individual, they will at once withdraw. So one night when the narrator comes home, he's drunk as usual, because this is something that becomes his habitual action. Every night he comes home and he's drunk. And one night when he comes back from town where he has been drinking, he imagines that the cat Pluto avoids him, doesn't want to be close to him. And so what does he do? He seizes him, and the cat feels scared. So Pluto, trying to get out of his grasp, he bites him on the hand. Now, when Pluto bites him on the hand, he is outraged. How dare this cat bite me? And he just loses control of all his senses. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, jinn-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. So he loses control totally, and it's like the devil possesses him. He's not what he was as a child, as a young man. He's a totally changed man. So what he does is he takes from his waistcoat a penknife, and this is really, really gory. He takes this penknife, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of his eyes from the socket. Now this is cruel, this is inhuman, but this is the extent to which he was made angry by the cat resisting capture. Remember, he had caught the cat because he thought that the cat was avoiding him, and because he is drunk, he has absolutely no control over his emotions. So he gets hold of the cat, and before you know it, he's taken out a penknife and he has taken out the eye of the poor beast. And he says, I blush, I burn, I shudder while I pen the damnable atrocity. So he realizes in retrospect what he did. And what he did was inhuman. It's not anything that a human being would do deliberately. And yet he does it because he's under the influence of drink. When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty. So when he wakes up in the morning, he cannot imagine what he did the night before. He feels guilty, he feels upset because he loves the cat. It's only under the influence of drink that he had been carried away and he had committed this cruel, this inhuman act of which he is very, very embarrassed. But it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling. So he says, even then, I didn't feel that I had done something very wrong. And the reason is that he starts drinking wine soon after he wakes up in the morning. And this wine allows him to forget the cruel deed, the inhuman deed that he has done. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. So he forgets about it in his drink, and that's a very, very important point in this story. The fact that when the narrator starts drinking, he forgets about everything. He forgets about the difference between right and wrong. He forgets the difference between good and evil. So that power of discrimination is totally eclipsed when he drinks. So the cat recovers slowly, but the eye does not come back. And the narrator says he went about the house as usual, but as is to be expected, he did not want to come close to the narrator. Whenever the narrator tried to sort of call him or hold him, the cat Pluto would run fast as possible away from the narrator. I had so much of my old heart left as to be first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable throe, the spirit of perverseness. So when the cat recovers, it avoids the narrator. In the beginning, the narrator feels sad that this cat, which had loved him so much, is now avoiding his presence. And then he starts to get irritated. And then he gets angry, and then he says, "How dare this cat avoid me? How dare this cat ignore my presence?" So as he says, the spirit of perverseness overtook him. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure than that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart. And then he goes off into a digression, and he says that philosophers discuss all emotions and all feelings and thought, but nobody has discussed perverseness. And he says, I think that perverseness is something that is far worse than anger. The desire to do bodily harm is worse than anything else that can be presented. Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law? So the spirit of perverseness, it allows you to break laws, because you say, well, you know, nothing is stronger than I am, and nothing can be more important. So this spirit of perverseness, he says, came to his final overthrow. So the spirit of perverseness is what haunts him, not to do wrong to cause someone harm, but to do wrong for the sake of wrong. So he starts to plan how he can sort of add to what he has done to the poor cat. That is the spirit of perverseness, not because he thinks that the cat has offended him in such a way, but because he has been cruel to the cat once, he wants to be even more cruel. So he starts to plan what he's going to do. So one morning, in cool blood, and he plans this out. It's deliberate. It's not action taken in the heat of the moment. He slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse at my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin. So he slips a noose about the neck of the cat and he hangs it from the tree. And all the while he's weeping because he knows he's doing wrong. He knows that the cat had not done any harm, and yet he does it because he thinks he must do it. And he knows that it was a deadly sin, a sin that would jeopardize my immortal soul in such a way as to place it even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. So he knows that he is committing a sin. He knows that this sin cannot be absolved, and yet he commits it. He hangs that cat which had done nothing to offend him. That poor innocent beast is hung from the limb of a tree. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were flames. The whole house was blazing, and it was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself escaped from this burning house. So the night of the day in which he commits this, as he says, murder, this heinous crime, this fiendish act, at night there's a cry of fire, and when he wakes up he finds that his bed is on fire, and it is with a lot of difficulty that he escapes from this fire with his servant and his wife. Of course, whatever he owned was swallowed up in that fire, and he despaired of ever recovering anything. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity. So he tries to think about it, to think of why the fire broke out, and what he could have done to have avoided this fire. So the day after that, he goes to look at the house that had burned down in the night, and he sees that there's only one wall standing, and there are people who are surrounding this wall. And he can't understand, for one thing, why that wall is standing, because it was not a supporting wall. It was not what is called a load-bearing wall. It was a compartment wall. It was a wall which separated one room from another. Specifically speaking, it is the wall of the room against which his bed had rested until it too was burnt in the fire. So there are people collected around this wall, and they say things like, "Oh, this is strange. We've never seen this before." And so he sort of becomes curious, he becomes anxious, and he wants to see why people are saying all these things. So he approaches the wall, and what he sees is that on that wall, as if it is an engraved image, is that of a huge cat. Remember, the cat that he had hung had been small. Pluto had not been a very large cat, but the cat that you could see on this wall was huge. It was the size of the wall. And what they could see was that there was a rope about the animal's neck. Remember? He had tied a noose around the cat's neck, and that is how he kills the cat. So what he sees on the wall, and what other people can also see, is that there is a rope around the neck of this cat, this engraved image on the wall. When I first beheld this apparition, my wonder and my terror were extreme. So when he first sees it, he's surprised, and then he's terror-stricken. And then he says that I don't have anything to worry about. It's not that cat. The cat that I hung had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. It wasn't a part of the house proper. And this garden where he had hung the cat had been full of people. So he says that probably somebody cut the cat down, threw the cat at the wall, and that is how the cat's image is engraved on the wall. And he thinks that this is done probably to wake him up, but that is not the case. This is just something that he's trying to console himself with. It's a very far-fetched image that somebody goes into the garden, sees the cat hanging, cuts down the cat, and then throws the cat through his bedroom window so that it hangs there on that wall, and when the house has burnt down, that wall stays. A very far-fetched image, but one that he finds easy to believe because he doesn't want to believe that he's guilty of having killed the cat. So he makes up this story to convince himself that he has not done wrong. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. So he's trying to convince himself that he has not done anything wrong, but deep down he is aware of the fact that he did wrong, that he committed a sin, and this sin is unforgivable because the animal could not speak, the animal could not protest, and the animal could not fight back. So he says that I tried to convince myself that it wasn't such a big deal. It was probably one of the neighbors who had thrown the cat at my wall. But he says, for months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half sentiment that seemed but was not remorse. So he gets a slight feeling of guilt as time passes by. He says it seemed, but it wasn't remorse, it wasn't guilt. I really wasn't sorry at what I had done. So he goes so far as to regret the loss of the animal and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species and of somewhat similar appearance with which to supply its place. So he goes about trying to hunt for a cat which would look like Pluto and which would love him and which in return he could love. So wherever he goes in these vile haunts, in these bars and these drinking halls, he looks around for a cat that would look somewhat like Pluto. And what happens? One night, as he says, as I sat in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin or rum. So in one of these drinking halls, he sees a black cat sitting on this huge barrel of gin or rum or whatever it was. And he says that I sat looking at it, and I had the impression that the cat was also looking at me. And when he goes over to the cat, it's a very friendly cat. It was a black one, a very large one, almost the size of Pluto, but it had a mark on its breast. It had a white mark on its breast. And so when he sees this cat, he's sort of he wants to take it back home. So what he does is he talks to the bartender and he says, I'd like to purchase this, I'd like to buy this cat. And the landlord says, it's not mine. I don't know where it came from. I've never seen it before. So if you want to take it and it's ready to go with you, fine, go ahead, take it away. Now, when the narrator sees this cat first, he approaches it and he rubs the back of the cat. The cat responds, the cat purrs, and the narrator is reminded of Pluto. But he's reminded in such a way that he wants to take this cat back home. So when he tries to pick it up, he finds out that the cat is very willing to go. And since it has just appeared out of nowhere and it does not belong to the landlord, the narrator decides to take it. And so the cat follows him home, and because it was a very lovable creature, it soon became very good friends with the narrator's wife. But what happened soon afterwards is that the narrator sort of starts disliking the cat. For no reason whatever, he doesn't like the cat. Remember, he has brought the cat home because he wanted some creature, some cat, to fill Pluto's place. Logically speaking, when he returns home, he should shower a lot of love and affection on the cat. But he doesn't do it. As soon as he finds out that it has become a favorite with his wife, he starts hating the cat. Now, he had expected that when he took the cat home, he would form an attachment to it. But he finds the reverse of that happening. He starts to dislike the cat, and he just cannot understand why he dislikes and why he starts to hate the cat so much. So by degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. So from dislike, from annoyance, he goes on to hating the cat. He avoids the creature with a certain sense of shame. And this shame is because he keeps on remembering what he had done to the predecessor, to the first black cat, to Pluto, who had been in his house for some years. So this sense of remorse does not allow him to abuse the cat. But he says, gradually I came to look at it with such hatred that I didn't want to be in the presence of the black cat at all. And what added to his hatred of the beast was the discovery that it too had been deprived of one of its eyes. So something that he doesn't see in the dark of the bar or the drinking hall is the fact that, like Pluto, this cat too had one eye only. And when he sees that one eye, he starts hating the cat until he doesn't want the cat to approach him at all. Now the thing is that the cat shows its love and affection for the narrator, but the narrator will not allow the cat to come close to him. And the fact that he had only one eye was something that his wife liked, and because she had always felt sad about Pluto losing an eye and Pluto being killed ultimately, the wife becomes very attached to this second black cat. And the more he gets attention from the wife, the less is that which he gets from the narrator. So he says that the cat continued to show his love and affection, and when I stood up to walk, it would wind itself between my legs, it would follow me wherever I went, and it wanted to show its love and affection, which it did by digging its sharp claws into the clothes of the narrator and thereby climbing up to his breast. And at times like this, he wants to kill the cat, but he stops himself because he is scared of this cat. It's big. It has those white hairs on its body, and so somehow or the other he starts to feel scared of this black cat. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. So he says that I cannot explain why I had this hatred towards the cat, but I was scared of the cat, and I hated the cat for being there. Now, his wife had pointed out to him the fact that there was that mark of white hair on the chest of this cat, and he says that our cat did not have any white hair, but that this one does. So she keeps on referring to that, and he ignores whatever comments his wife makes. But when he looks carefully at this mark on the cat's breast, he says that it was like a gallows. You know, the kind of thing with which they hanged people in medieval times was called the gallows. It was also used to execute people who had ideas different from those of the government. So when the narrator looks very closely and sees that this shape is that of the gallows, he moans, he is agonized, and he starts thinking of the past and the future. And now was I indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity. So he says, I had reached a point where I could not think of anything more cruel. I had feelings about me that were full of hatred for this black cat. The more it came to me, the more I tried to throw her out. And he says, a brute beast of whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed was for him a man fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of insufferable woe. So he says that the cat was a dumb creature. Whether you're talking about Pluto or you're talking about the new cat, he says, unbelievable. And so he says, I was wretched beyond the wretchedness of humanity. Then I started doing things which I could not have imagined myself doing. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, such as that of the cat at home and the fact that he had killed his best friend, Pluto, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. So whatever little good there remained, that too disappeared. So with the passage of time, the more that this new cat comes close to the narrator, the more angry he feels, the more his reason and judgment give way. And he says, I became full of an indescribable hatred. And this started to show towards my treatment of human beings and of animals. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. So his anger, his frustration is also evident in his behavior towards his wife. And one day he says that we went down into the cellar. She had gone with me. By this time they're living in an old building. Remember, their house had burned down. All their property had been destroyed. So they have been reduced to poverty. And in their poverty they are inhabiting this old building. And one day when he goes down into the cellar of, or the basement of the house, his wife also accompanies him. The cat followed me down the steep stairs and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. So the cat, because the cat still doesn't understand what is going on, so the cat shows a lot of love and affection for the narrator, but the narrator cannot understand it. Uplifting an axe and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which of course would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. So he picks up this axe because he's so angry with this cat. So far he has been sort of trying to control his emotions by thinking of that one inhuman act that he had committed earlier. But now what he does is he picks up this axe. He's so angry, so frustrated, he wants to kill this cat. So he picks up this axe and he delivers what he considers a fatal blow to the cat. But what happened is that the blow was deflected by his wife, and so his wife caught the axe. His wife stopped the axe from descending onto the cat. She stopped it with her head. And so powerful was this movement in which he was swinging the axe, that the axe was buried in her brain. It wasn't something that just struck and then bounced back. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. So she falls down dead and doesn't even make a sound. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith and with entire deliberation to the task of concealing the body. Now, when he realizes that he has killed his wife, he has to dispose of her body. He's not brave enough to go to the police and surrender himself, because his mind has been so depraved by all the drinking that he has been doing, that he does not think that he should go and own up to this murder. The moment he realizes that it is not the cat but his wife that he has killed, he starts thinking of how he's going to dispose of her body. Many projects entered my mind. At one point he thinks that he would break the corpse up into small pieces and distribute them. The other times he thinks he would package this in a box and have it taken away by the postman, by the mail delivery van. And then he starts to think maybe he should throw it in the well. And then he looks at the wall of the cellar, and he sees that there is this kind of chimney-like place. And this chimney-like place is sort of protruding from the wall. And so he starts thinking of all those stories where people were walled up, and he decides that this is the best solution. So what he does is that he takes down the plaster and the bricks of this chimney that has been constructed, and that's sort of jutting out of the wall. He puts the body of his wife there. He places the bricks with the help of mortar, and then he plasters the whole thing over, thinking that he has concealed his murder very effectively. And he does all this in a very secretive manner, and he obviously has to do it himself. So it takes him time, but he, as the narrator himself says, he relayed the whole structure as it originally stood. So by the time he was done, you couldn't make out that somebody else had pulled down that wall and had made it up again. But there was a lot of debris there. Obviously he had taken down that wall or that section of the wall, and so whatever bricks and mortar, etc., remained there on the floor, he carried them out of the cellar. He disposed of them, and then when the cellar was as clean as it had been before, he started thinking that he had done everything that he could, and he had done a very good job, because the wall did not present the appearance of having been disturbed. Had I been able to meet with it, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared, and now what you see, what happens is that he cannot see the cat anywhere. And he tries to search for it, but he can't see it. And for the first time he says that at night he slept with a calm and peaceful frame of mind, because that hated creature was not there. Now he doesn't talk about going to sleep with a murdered wife that he has walled up, but he talks even now about the cat. His mind, his thoughts are preoccupied with thoughts of the cat, which does not make an appearance in the night, and so he sleeps very calmly, very peacefully. The second and the third day passed, and still this cat does not make an appearance. So he thinks that the cat has run away and he is a free man and he can breathe in peace. So thinking that the monster had gone forever, he thinks that he can now rest in peace because he's not going to be bothered by the cat anymore, and he thinks that his future is secured because he doesn't have to worry about anything. Now, meantime, there have been inquiries, but he gives answers which are accepted, or which he thinks are accepted as an explanation of where his wife is. But on the fourth day, what happens is that a party of the police comes up very unexpectedly. They come into the house and they start making an investigation and saying, okay, where was your wife? Who did she go with? Do you know what time she left the house, etc., etc. And because he knows that his deed is well hidden, he becomes overconfident. And when the officers want him to accompany him in their search, he goes down into the cellar. You know, he has nothing to hide. So when the police tell him that they want to search the cellar, he accompanies them because he thinks that he has nothing to hide. There was no nook or corner unexplored. So the police go into every corner of the house, the cellar, and they do this exercise 3 or 4 times, and yet they can find no clue. And when they go again into the cellar, you know, he's not scared because he knows that his secret is safe, and his heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. He thinks that he is innocent in spite of the fact that he has committed this heinous crime, this sin of murder that he has committed. So they look around the cellar once more, and then they are ready to depart. And when they are ready to depart, you know, he has this this stick in his hand, and he says, you know, I'm glad that I have been able to put your minds at rest because this is a very well constructed house. And as he is doing this, you know, he's so confident that he has this stick in his hand, and with this stick in his hand, he starts tapping that place in the wall where he has walled up his wife. And when he does that, you know what happens? This whole wall is there. It's hiding his secret. But at the moment that he starts tapping with the cane, there is a scream, as he says, a cry like the sobbing of a child, quickly swelling into a long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and of the demons that exult in the damnation. So there's this scream that goes up, and that, of course, makes the policemen stop in their tracks. And now the narrator thinks, I am done, I am finished. So he sort of half faints, and soon the policemen come back and they catch hold of him, and they start to pull down the wall. And when they do, they see the decaying corpse of the wife and on top of the head, because he has, remember, he's walled her up vertically. So on the head of the corpse, there sits the cat. So let me quickly wind this up. The story is titled The Black Cat, and it's one of Poe's more mysterious stories. He talks about a cat that the narrator adopts as pet, and when he starts drinking, his mind is all confused, and one day when he's very angry with the cat, he just takes a penknife and removes one of the eyes from the socket. And with the passage of time, his anger increases until one day he hangs this cat. And on the same night that he hangs the cat, his house burns down, and there's only that one wall that is remaining, which has the impression of or an engraved image of a huge cat with a noose around its neck. And all this is because he has fallen into the habit of drinking constantly, and this habit becomes so strong with him that even later, when he adopts another cat, he carries out more or less the same sort of cruel treatment with him, until one day the cat aggravates him so much, makes him so angry, that he picks up an axe and he wants to kill the cat. But because his wife is there with him, his wife tries to stop him from doing this a second time, and the axe is buried into his brain. So angry, so cruel has the narrator become by that time, that he walls up his wife, and when the police come around to look for the corpse, he taps the wall with a cane and says, you know, this house is very well constructed. And when he does that, there is the sound of a shriek, a wailing, and the police party pull down that structure that he has put up, and there they see the corpse of the wife and the cat. So this black cat betrays him, or is the source of the truth being revealed. And of course he's arrested at that time, but so guilty is he that when he's convicted of murder and he is condemned to die, the night before he is to be executed, he sits down to write this whole story down, because he says that this is a sequence of events which people will not believe, because I cannot believe that these things have actually happened, but they did happen, and this is the true story. So thank you for being very patient. In the next lecture, we're going to do another story by Edgar Allan Poe. Allah Hafiz.